Hello, my name's Josh. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I've recently been through a divorce. Thanks for coming back to my channel. Today I wanted to make a video that's a little different than the other ones that I've made, and it's really going to focus more around practical advice for someone going through a divorce. I need to start by saying I am not an attorney, so I'm not offering any legal advice here. This is just more practical advice to think through while you're going through the divorce process. The first piece of advice I would give is, if you have children, is to remember that ultimately the real victims of divorce are the children. So if you are moving through the divorce process, there are times you're going to have to remember that, as hurt as you may be, that as much of a victim as you may feel like you are, that whatever may have happened in that relationship to end the marriage, none of that really matters. Because in the end, what matters is those children, because really they are the victims here. They didn't choose this divorce. They were brought into this family by you and your former spouse. And so they deserve care and love and compassion through this divorce process. And it needs to start early, and it needs to happen often. The truth is, this divorce is going to affect the rest of their life. And so we need to remember, as we're moving through that divorce process, that it is our responsibility as the parent to care for those children. That can be a very difficult task. It can be very daunting. It may require seeking help. It may require counseling. It may require a lot. But the first thing to remember in that divorce process is that they need to be taken care of first and foremost. The second thing I would, as far as practical advice goes, is remember that, especially once the divorce has been filed for, anything you say can and will be used against you. So if you and your spouse have a disagreement and you get rude and you get nasty, or you say something that is disparaging to them and could be considered hurtful, that could be used against you. That whether you're in the mediation, go through a mediation process, or before a judge, if it's shown that you are being spiteful and nasty and letting your emotions get the better of you in the situation, that can hurt your case. So I would advise, especially once that divorce has been started, do everything you can to avoid all-out arguments with your soon-to-be future spouse. Try to be as civil and polite as possible, even during disagreements. If you need to walk away from a conversation because you can tell it's going to start getting to a really kind of hot place where people may lose control, then that's okay. Then walk away from that conversation and come back to it when things have calmed down. But it's very important to remember, anything you say can be used against you. And on that note, social media is included on that. If you put it on social media, it can be seen. And don't think for a second that if you blocked your former spouse or soon-to-be former spouse, that it can't be seen. I have known a couple friends whose former spouse blocked them, and then they were posting things on Facebook, they were posting in different groups and things of that nature, and that was used against them. So be very careful with social media. I actually know some attorneys suggest to their clients that during a divorce process that you don't use social media at all, and perhaps you should even consider deleting it while you're going through the divorce process. So as much as we use social media to get help and support, and that is a good thing, we need to be extremely careful with what we put on Facebook, on Twitter, on any social media platform, whatever the platform may be. So that's my second piece of advice. My third piece of advice is think long term. And what I mean by that is sometimes there's a couple scenarios that I've seen play out that were not good because someone was thinking in the short term and not the long term. One of those was I had a very good friend who was blindsided by his now ex-wife's request for a divorce. He was in love with her still. He did not want the divorce. She was insistent upon it, so it was going through. And the law prescribed a certain amount of, let's say, alimony should be paid out to her. And because he loved her, he offered to pay her much more generously than what the law would have required. The reason he did that was because secretly inside he was still in love with her, and he was hopeful that somehow, some way she'd see his generosity and she would change her mind. That didn't happen. And they went through, they had the divorce. Then some years later, he remarried, and now he is in a position where he is still, because of his overly generous offer, he is still paying his ex-wife quite a sum of money. And now he has a new wife that it would sure be a whole lot nicer if he had the money back that he had, wouldn't have had to pay. So be very, very careful on not thinking long term, right? My friend was thinking about right here, right now, maybe this will save my marriage, and now he regrets it. Another thing when it comes to thinking long term has to do with the way we communicate with both our soon-to-be former in-laws and our soon-to-be former spouse. We need to be as respectful as we can to all of them, despite what hurt we may feel, because we're going to be in a co-parenting relationship. We're going to hopefully encourage our children to have good relationships with their aunts and uncles and grandparents on the other side of the family. And which means we're going to have to be face to face with those people sometimes. And it's important to try to cultivate and maintain some semblance of a positive relationship, if not just a total positive relationship. And although that may seem impossible right now, you never know what may happen in 10 years from now or 20 years from now, whatever the case may be. So thinking long term and acting for that now is really something that is an important thing to consider while moving through the divorce process. The final thing I would suggest, and this came from a close friend of mine, was don't do anything that can be considered underhanded or deceptive while you're going through the divorce process. What I mean by that is I've had a couple friends here now that one where it was a woman who found out that her husband was secretly kind of siphoning money off of their bank account. She didn't know it until towards the end of the divorce. And that actually came back to really haunt her now ex-husband. They were able to go back and do a lot more investigation and figure out how much money he had siphoned off. And let's just say by the time they went to court, in their case, the judge did not look favorably at all upon that situation and really penalized the husband for that. I also have a gentleman that I know who his ex-wife was hiding recording devices all over the place, always recording conversations between him and friends and him on the phone and him and their children, as well as her conversations with him. She ended up turning those in during the divorce process. Mind you, he lives in a one-party state, which means as long as one of the people in that conversation is recording, it's okay. So in that case, the conversations between her and him would have been okay, legal, but the others were not. But because of that track history of constantly recording, it was not good. Now, they went to mediation, but the mediator said that actually left kind of a black mark on the wife because she was secretly and kind of underhandedly recording everything. On top of that, this is kind of the funny part. On top of that, the mediator told my friend that I should say the mediator is also an attorney, a family law attorney, said that whenever she has clients that come to her with a recording, she always advises them to she doesn't even listen to it. She just says, burn the tapes, get rid of the evidence. Because she said in her own experience, and this mediator apparently had a lot of years of experience, said that more often than not, those recordings were just as much as a detriment as they were a help. And so, because if they're turned in, it can be used on both sides. It doesn't necessarily go one way. And oftentimes, in this mediator's advice, it does not prove what whoever's turning the recording in, the recordings don't prove much of anything. So be very careful, because what it does is it speaks to your character if you're doing things that, even if you feel like there's a good reason for it, if it's considered underhanded or deceptive in any way, that can be used against you. And it's just wise to not do that. Now, that doesn't mean if you have to prove something like perhaps your spouse is abusive, like actually abusive, and maybe you need to record it. Maybe that just to prove it that occurs, there may be a justifiable reason for it. I just know that as I talked to my attorney about my friend's situation, she said the exact same thing. My attorney said, no way. I tell my clients too, like, recordings are never, in her experience, they've never been good. So she just advises against it totally. But again, it's that idea of doing something that's underhanded, that's not kind of above board, if you will. So don't cipher money. Don't play with any money. And actually, when it comes to money, when that divorce process starts, take a snapshot of your money and watch your money. And that actually both spouses should be doing that, just so everything, when you hit the mediation or when you hit the court, if you both have been watching the money and you're both comfortable with it, then that becomes something there's no disagreement about. You can at least trust each other in that regard. Anyways, today's video is a little different than normal. I know it's not necessarily how to spiritually get through a divorce or something to that nature, but it's advice that I've gained. Some of it I lived through, some of it I've seen from firsthand from others, and I think it's important for people to know. Again, my name is Josh. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I've recently been through divorce. This channel is not endorsed by the church. I'm not a counselor or therapist. I just learned some lessons along the way of my divorce, and I'm just trying to share them. Thanks.